In 2019, YouTube was caught violating the Child Online Privacy Protection Act, or COPPA. Since settling, YouTube has enacted new policies that are meant to serve as a smokescreen so they can dodge responsibility and scapegoat creators. As such, for my own protection, it is my obligation to advise you that this video is not aimed at children. My target audience is not children. Parental discretion is advised. Hey guys, how's everyone doing? This is the Sentinel watching over Geekdom, and welcome back to Sentinel Reviews. Our look at Dark Shadows, the horror collection, is nearly at an end, so here we are with the penultimate story, The Curse of Shurafa, released in June of 2015, written by Rob Morris, directed by David Darlington and Ursula Burton. The Curse of Shurafa stars Andrew Collins and Scott Horan. As always, I will be talking spoilers, so in the description box below, you'll find the link to the Big Finish website where you can buy The Curse of Shurafa, or you can get it as part of the Horror Collection digital bundle. And just a second here. Sorry, OBS updated and it looks like its entire audio interface changed a little bit, so I need to readjust everything. Anyway, The Curse of Shurafa is a fun story. I have to admit, of every story in this set, it was the one I was the most looking forward to. But in that regard, I was kind of let down. Not too bad, it's still great, but just... yeah, and why was I looking forward to this one? Hang on, audio's still a little high. Why was I so looking forward to this one? Because this is the second audio, chronologically the first, I believe, where Julia Hoffman is a major character. The other one, of course, being Bloodline. Because outside of these two, every other audio, Julia is only mentioned in passing. And Julia being one of my favorite characters, of course I love more Julia content. But yeah, so this story, also this is one of the all of these single releases Dark Shadows have done are released in a range called dramatized readings. I talked about this a little bit, or, their audiobook range. And I mentioned how that name is kind of a misnomer because most of these are full cast. But this one is actually a dramatized reading. It is an audiobook. The premise is that Barnabas and his relative? Barnabas is on a dark and stormy night in Collinwood. Barnabas is telling a story to Harry Cunningham. Harry is Amy's stepson from her first marriage. This was all explained and introduced in Bloodlust. And he's telling a story about a trip he took with Julia Hoffman and Professor Stokes to Egypt, where they incurred the wrath of a mummy. Now, Andrew Collins gives a phenomenal reading of this. As an audiobook narrator, his narration is good. He's not very dynamic, He doesn't give each character their own voice. Everything he reads in his voice. And that's not always a deal breaker when it comes to audiobook. If you can be very engaging in the reading, I can still look past that. And luckily, thankfully, Andrew Collins is very engaging. Also, the sound design is really great, and it really helps the narration. Because this is Barnabas telling a story, it allows the descriptive language to flow in a way it wouldn't if this was an audio drama. Like I said, Big Finish is good at knowing when to tell you what's happening and when you can pick it up for yourself. But as an audiobook reading, it allows the story to flourish in a way that sometimes the audio dramas just don't quite pull off. For example, the way Barnabas describes the flies. As I mentioned, the story Barnabas is recounting takes place in Egypt, and this mummy is able to possess people through flies, which, let's be honest, for a horror story, flies are a really good touch. Just knowing what flies are and what they do and just how disgusting they are, it really adds to the disturbing imagery, especially these images the story makes of just these flies possessing and controlling people through this mummy, Shurafa. Um, is there anything else I want to talk about? And sorry, because this is an audiobook reading, and there's not as much elements to it, like there's not multiple cast members, there's not multiple performances, there really isn't a lot to go over because, like I said, it's one person performing the entire story, and the performance is great. The story itself is really good about like I said, this mummy has awakened and he tries to blackmail Barnabas into freeing him because when Shurafa was sealed away, the people who revolted against him tied his fate to the bloodline of one family. And if that family were to ever die out, Shurafa would be freed. So Shurafa finds a way to blackmail Barnabas into freeing him. Which, as Barnabas is the reluctant vampire, he hates being a vampire, he fights not to give in to his urges. And it's something that causes a lot of tension in this story with him and Julia. And for the role she plays, Julia, even though it's Andrew Collins just reading for the part, Julia is also really good, Despite, how bleak things seem, Julia never loses her resolve. Stokes is also good, although he is pivotal to the plot, but he plays a much smaller role than Barnabas and Julia. If I did have one complaint, it is part to do with the sound design. Like I did mention the sound design, and then I switched over to talking about the narration. The sound design through most of this story is good. Like when they talk about the swarms of flies, you can hear them, which just adds to the of it. Or, how Andrew Collins' voice is distorted when he brings voice to Shurafa. If there was one thing I had to complain about, it would be this. There are 3 moments I can recall off the top of my head where Barnabas talks about Julia reacting to something. How she recoils in terror, or she seems ill because of what Shurafa is doing to her, or when she calls Barnabas's name. And the story uses clips of Grayson Hall from the series. And this is not the first time Big Finish has done that, but every time they do that, I've hated it. Like, it's so uncanny valley. It's so unnecessary. And, furthermore, it's just, and it's so unnecessary. It's so uncanny valley. I know I just said that. And it feels so forced. Like when you stop to listen to it, it really doesn't work. And as I mentioned, this is not the first time. And for this story, which is a dramatized reading, there's no point to it, because this is Barnabas recalling this entire story to Harry. There's really no point to include these sound bites of Julia because he's playing all the parts. But this is not the first time Big Finish has done this. Spoilers for Bloodline now. In Bloodline, Barnabas and Julia get their original bodies back. Another detail I hate, because the storyline throughout the Dark Shadows audios is that Barnabas and Julia lost their bodies, and their spirits were transferred into new vessels, which is why Barnabas is played by Andrew Collins, and why Julia is played by Julie Newmar. And, it's like, why do that? Why call attention to it? Soap operas have to recast all the time. Just do it and say nothing about it. Don't bring attention to it. Which also would have given us many more stories with Barnabas and Julia. That's a bit of a tangent, but anyway, as I was mentioning, at the end of Bloodline, when Barnabas and Julia get their bodies back, Bloodline does that as well with these spliced clips of Andrew Collins and Grayson Hall. And similarly, in the final story in this set, and Read All Over, they do it again with Joe Haskell. And just, like I said, it's so uncanny, and I hate it every time they do it. The only time it kind of worked for me was in Maggie and Quentin, The Lover's Refrain, because in the final story in that set, they did it with Sam Evans. But the idea in context for that story is that Sam was supposed to be a ghost. So in a meta sense, it did kind of work. But yeah, The Curse of Shurafa is a little disappointing, but it's still really good. Andrew Collins is a great narrator who really brings this story to life, and other than that, my only real complaint is that one issue I brought up with the sound design. And that's really all I have to say for The Curse of Shurafa. Not much right now, but join me next week when we look at the final story in the horror collection, and we see the return of an old friend in And Red All Over. But those are just my thoughts on The Curse of Shurafa. Have you heard it? What are yours? Start a conversation in the comments below. Remember to like, comment, subscribe. Click the bell next to subscribe to get notifications when I upload. In the description box below, you'll find the link to my Ko-fi, where you can support the channel, and you'll find the link to my Twitter, where you can follow me and get updates on the channel. This is the Sentinel watching over Geekdom, and I'll see you next time.